Hey guys, I'm here. Time to dive into our first breakdown of the new season of Loki from New Rockstars for episode 1 of season 2. If you haven't seen my reaction to the first episode, it was wild, man. Go check it out. I really enjoyed this first episode. It was a lot of fun. Again, I think Loki is just one of those shows, especially on the Disney Plus side of things for Marvel, that is excelled. It's done great, at least for me. I think it's definitely one of the top ones. And I'm all here for what we've got at this point. We got some answers, but lots of questions in the last episode, and I can't wait to see how the season unfurls. But I'm sure there's a lot of little nuggets that we missed throughout, and that's where New Rockstars comes in. If you're not subscribed to them, I'll have a link to their video in the description of this one. Go check them out if you haven't already. Subscribe to their channel. Let's go ahead and dive in. Here we go.
Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Eric Voss, and this is a breakdown of Loki Season 2, Episode 1. Loki has been one of my favorite MCU titles ever, and so far Season 2 is building on the high-concept humor and marvelous mystery, even without an appearance from... Not today, miss! In case you don't remember my breakdowns of Loki Season 1, when it comes to the show, I hold nothing back. I literally go frame by frame, not just to point out Marvel Easter eggs, but to, illuminate the attention to detail, to decipher all visible text on screens hidden by designers like folks from Cantina Creative.
Yeah.
I have interviewed to try to make myself an expert on where and how they hide stuff, and sometimes I even illustrate abstract time travel concepts and theoretical physics. To connect these, you would have to kind of bend three-dimensional space on itself. So when it comes to Loki, you're in the right place, folks. I'm so glad to be back with you to experience this amazing show every week. Let's go! We open with the Marvel Studios title card. Now, there have been several updates from throughout Phase 4, like the sides of the R have Jane Foster, Thor, and Moon Knight. She-Hulk thunderclaps from the side of the A. He remains from the Loki Season 1 finale when Sylvie first stepped into his office from the elevator. He appears at the top of the A because he dominates the Avengers. But the latest edition that only has shown up now on the leg of the
Miss
R.
Minutes!
Hey, y'all, it's Miss Minutes! This is a moment when she's flipping through the fake TVA records on a fake TVA spacecraft that would fly through the void to stall Sylvie, and it was one of the only moments Miss Minutes and Renslayer ever worked together in cahoots quite like this, at least so far. And yes, on the main Marvel Studios title, you see Kamala Khan appearing in the R, and then Shuri from Black Panther Wakanda Forever appearing in the V. And yes, this whole title is colored green and gold, which are Loki's colors. Okay, we open on the eyes of the statue of a Kang variant, He Who Remains, towering over the TVA, just as another statue did in the final shots of Season 1, after Loki was pushed by Sylvie through a time door from He Who Remains Citadel at the end of time back into the TVA. Now, it's worth noting that this He Who Remains statue is not the one Loki ended on in the first season. That was back in the TVA archives section. This is in the main part of the TVA from the legal courtroom level. But starting with He Who Remains eyes puts us in an apprehensive state. Like whatever we do, some version of Kang is out there always watching us. Actually, in various shots of this background, several of these statues are scattered across this vast interior, looking out in all different directions. So we see Loki sprinting.
He's always watching.
And the other hunters, and his head perfectly aligns with the statue of He Remains in the background, which is a clever little way. That is a nice little detail. His responsibility to rule the TVA, and He Remains dead. Meanwhile, Mobius and the hunters' heads don't align quite as well, and it's just so sad to see Loki in slow motion turn back to look into the eyes of Mobius, his friend, and realize that this past version of Mobius has no idea who he is. The last time Loki and Mobius were on this walkway actually was when they really didn't know who each other were, back in the very first episode of the series after Mobius took Loki out of the courtroom. And back then, it was a dark TVA background. Here, there is some light in the distance, as we are seeing the TVA in an earlier past era, when He Remains still ruled it somewhat transparently, before he wiped everyone's minds and began hiding behind the timekeepers. Mobius and B-15 do not...
Before he took away the illumination and hid everything behind this veil of darkness.
Not know who Loki is, as this would be before he ever met them. But the confusing part of this is, when Loki approached this past Mobius and this past B-15, they were talking about this.
That's what, 63 new branches in this unit alone?
Does he want us to just let them all branch?
Well, at this point, how are we even going to stop it?
So those...
Oh, that is a good point.
63 branches must not be referring to Sylvie rupturing the sacred timeline in the present, as we did see
something else has to be going on right now.
Moments earlier in the present day TVA, a moment that we actually see in these opening minutes here in the present. But rather, those 63 branches that they were talking about in the archive must be referring to some other past incident in the past TVA, where the sacred timeline also really got out of control at some point. So when Sylvie...
See, that's why it lent credence to a lot of people, and myself included, that because of their interference, the TVA was rewritten. Its history rewritten. So I was under the impression we were in a new timeline, new TVA, which is not the case. It's just something happened in the past that is similar to what's happening now, but it's also after the war, so that begs some questions.
Pushed Loki through that time door from the Citadel. He was going to a past TVA where the sacred timeline had also reached some critical state for some reason. He time slipped, and neither he nor we the viewers saw it or realized it. His temporal aura must have cross-wired with his past and present self. So how many times has the TVA reached this critical mass in its history? What was the past incident with the 63 branches that Mobius and Beef and Team were fretting about?
I'm wondering, like, I'm sure there's other instances of it for reasons why to reset a TVA member's memory. But could it be so they don't remember these mass incursions, these mass spiralings of these branches? Like, what's here is the trigger, so they don't remember any of it, and that, I don't know, it reinvents itself every time this cycle repeats.
In the archives, it could just be that the TVA's temporal loom reaching a critical mass is a destined cyclical event, something that happens again and again and again, a kind of apocalyptic Ragnarok that every era of the TVA inevitably goes through, kind of like a bubble of a market bursting. I mean, hey, they must have designed those blast doors on the loom observation deck for a reason, right? So in the scene, Loki sees one of those yellow mail trucks flying past. We actually saw these in the wide shot of episode 1 of the series. Loki jumps off the ledge past this orange billboard that reads Timeline Preservation Administration and lands in the mail truck numbered 435. It's kind of like Lilu landing in Corbin Dallas's taxi in The Fifth Element. We see a few boxes flying out, and you know there's some future TVA employee who's like, hey, you know, I never got my package. This mail truck flies past a few other interesting signs: coercive conversation center and variant affairs. And then from the mail truck driver's rearview mirror hangs a missed minute ornament. This driver panics and clips the cheek of the He Who Remains statue, causing it to crumble. And we stay on this crumbling for a bit. As if to suggest, hey, you know, He Who Remains is capable of crumbling and disintegrating. He is mortal. For what it's worth, most of the Kang variants we see in the Quan post-credit scene also had scars and missing body parts and various augmentations. Eugene Cordero returns as Casey, buffing the floor. Now, you know this is an earlier era of Casey because his breast pocket does not have the ink stains that he typically always has. In season 1, Casey said
that is a good detail
behind that desk. So the fact that he's a janitor now tells us that this was from some past era before his memory was reset. When
good catch.
Crashes, we see it has a Miss Minutes bumper sticker reading, how's my driving? Report me to. It's not even called this number, it's straight up report me to. The round orange chronomonitor screen has an older era interface to show the sacred timeline, like it's blockier and staggered. And
it's super pixelated.
As opposed to the smooth curved line of the present era, which might remind you of like early computers before Steve Jobs insisted on adding all this extra memory so that like the corners of his windows could be curved. Casey removes his headphones and listen closely.
Your mind and relax.
Yeah, it's some guided meditation recording, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is the voice of Tara Strong, who also voices Miss Minutes.
Yeah, it sounded like her. Yeah. They should have just not had that cutaway.
We also do see that mail truck smoking as it zigzags away. So
I think that was his exhaust popping and it regaining power, but we were meant to think it was the thud. I kind of wish they would have showed it go away, because that would have been some dark, funny shit to me.
Maybe she is okay. The screen falls and cracks the floor emblem of the TVA. We see the hourglass logo, and it's pierced by a sword. Because it's not just about time, these guys are slashing and burning timelines to maintain order. There is a significantly long take of Loki appealing to Casey.
There's a lot of long takes in this episode.
A camera to whip back and forth between Loki and Casey. Just an interesting camera style that they're going to use throughout the episode. And what I love most about it is that it proves they are shooting these moments on practical sets that they actually built.
Yeah, dude.
So much of what we see on Disney Plus is shot on the volume. Here they just keyed stuff in on a blue screen behind these sets. Loki experiences what we later learn is called time slipping, which has a
that effect is so wicked.
And his limbs contort and stretch from each other, looking like bubblegum. It's just a very cool way of showing a person becoming unstuck from time, to borrow Kurt Vonnegut's term for consciousness-based time travel in the novel Slaughterhouse 5. So time slipping is a type of time travel
Interesting.
I've defined in the past as vertical time travel, in which a character slides forwards or backwards within their own timeline. This is not to be confused with what I've called glitching or lateral time travel, in which you hop across different timelines or universes within a multiverse. Loki is doing what Doctor Strange does or Thanos does when they use the smoother, more intentional form of time slipping using the time stone, or what Kamala Khan does when she opens the bangle to tear a hole in space-time and go back to the 1940s. But the other kind of time travel, what I've called lateral time travel, is more of like multiverse hopping. It's what Miles Morales does when he glitches in the animated Spider-Verse movies, or what Wanda Maximoff does when she dreamwalks in Multiverse of Madness. So Loki has now time slipped into the present.
Fair.
The windows of this room
Makes
are covered,
sense.
which means that they might still be under repair from that mail truck crash that has now been written into the past. Casey now has the pens and ink stains in his front pocket, and the floor crack is now there.
Has it always been there?
The crack? It's been there as long as I can remember.
So to be clear, that
As
crack
long
was
as he
not
can
on the
remember.
floor emblem when we saw it back in Loki season 1. So Loki really has altered history here. This idea of the past.
Oh, maybe a missed detail because season 2 wasn't written yet. But that could be an interesting implication that Loki's time slipping can influence the timeline. Maybe that is why we were seeing what was happening with OB, because maybe he hadn't really seen these things until that moment Loki rewrote history when he time slipped back and met OB. Whoa, interesting.
In real time is a time travel convention that we've seen in titles like Back to the Future, Frequency, Butterfly Effect.
I did see a comment that said that, so the Back to Future stuff is not bullshit like in-game suggests.
But for the Loki series, it establishes that the TVA is on its own timeline axis with cause and effect.
Well, this could also be the change, because time travel now is uncontrolled. The TVA is in disarray. There's no sacred timeline anymore, right? So the rules, technically, I guess, of time travel were different prior to Endgame. But then again, you gotta like think about, this is all happening out of time, so it would affect all time because we're separate and around rather than linear with what's happening on the timeline itself.
In season 1, Mobius told Loki that time passes differently here in the TVA. And in the comics, the TVA is in a dimension called the null time zone. So we've been assuming that this facility is kind of like time independent or frozen in time, but no.
Not
Things
anymore.
do happen and marks are made. We see Casey is holding this orange book. This is actually the TVA guidebook that we see in the closing credit montage that OB references later.
It's in the TVA guidebook?
But my suggestion was that maybe the TVA was previously removed from time, and maybe the removal of He Who Remains placed it back, or the fracturing of the branches and all this stuff has put it back in sync. Like where they take Loki out of the time stream, maybe that's what happened to the TVA as a whole, but they have now been reintegrated into it. But then again, it could just be as simple as they've been lied to this entire time and never believed that this was the case, putting it in its own kind of pocket. I don't know.
There's one on every desk at the TVA?
Yeah, he says it's a detailed index of every mechanical classification and maintenance routine in each sector, on each device, and inside every computer program at the TVA. And OB says he wrote it himself. Since Casey had to sit at his desk for most of his history, he might have been the only employee to read it other than OB. I think it's going to be a pretty important book to keep an eye on in the future. Okay, the white on black title with the flickering typefaces returns. This was designed by the Perception Design Lab, who said that they used the fonts of the titles from every MCU movie Loki has appeared in, so that would include
interesting.
Avengers 2012 and Avengers Infinity War. Some of the typefaces are Norse runes. At one point we see an O with little horns on it. Despite the changing text, the color is uniform to show that despite all these variations, we're still looking at a Loki. So back in the TVA, present Mobius and present B-15 are still in that main chronomonitor bay reacting to the aftermath of Sylvie's decision. B-15 wants to tell everyone in the TVA that they're variants, but Mobius is wary.
Hey, everything you've been doing is wrong, and all your gods are dead.
Since Loki
I mean,
and
that's a
Sylvie
good
came
point.
into this as gods or demigods, the delusionment of gods and faith has really been the core to this series. Since Loki worshipped himself, his god died in the very first episode, Glorious Purpose, as he has had to come to terms with the fact that everything he had been doing was wrong. Mobius realizes Miss Minutes is offline.
Yeah.
We last saw her in the season 1 finale in the Citadel, also when she was sandbagging Renslayer for TVA records. We know from trailer footage a version of her will show up in 1893 Chicago. We meet Hunter X5, played by Rafael Casal, who we know from preseason reports reports and trailer footage, we'll also be playing the movie star Brad Wolfe at the Zaniac premiere in a future episode. But here we see he's also a TVA hunter, and he's kind of a jerk. He mocks Mobius' love of jet skis from that Wake magazine.
Maybe that's his variant.
Mobius' desk in season 1.
Jet skis, sea-doos.
You know,
or the life he was taken from.
It's a personal watercraft, and it's actually a brand, same way Kleenex is.
He's right, and I only know this because in journalism
I didn't know that.
Into us from the AP Style Guide, and this always capitalized rule also applies to Velcro. And previously it applied to dumpster, though that was updated to a common term that you're allowed to decapitalize back in 2014. X5 reports.
With Renslayer missing, there's a new judges council. So General Dox and Judge Gamble would like to see you both in the war room.
Now, we will meet these two shortly, but General Dox is played by
Liza Aaron
from Game of Thrones and was also a First Order officer in The Last Jedi.
Oh, yeah!
DOX might come from Mr. Paradox, a TVA judge from the comics who judged She-Hulk for the crime of warning Hawkeye of his impending death. Mobius and Mr. Ouroboros, who's a clone of Mr. Paradox in the comics, show up in this issue as well. But the name Dox could also be a nod to the internet slang of doxing, i.e. outing the personal information of a private individual to get them in trouble. Now, I wouldn't call what General Dox is doing now to be doxing, but something closer to like blocking or deplatforming. But hey, maybe she got those pass medals for exposing anonymous variants. Judge Gamble is played by Liz Carr, and she might have gotten her name from the TVA member Justin Alphonse Gamble in the comics, who believed the TVA needed to move against robots called the Dreadlocks, and eventually he wrote a Broadway play called The Day of the Dreadlocks, which kind of seems like what
Daleks.
Brad Wolfe is gonna do.
Those look like straight plays on Daleks, dude. Even down to the title of that little play. But yeah, and she was also in The Witcher here recently, seasons 2 and 3.
Doing his sacred timeline dream life. Now, in this elevator and in the war room, X5 stands with his hands on his chest plate, making X and 5 super visible, like some dumbass who tattoos one word across his knuckles. And X5 kind of looks like XS, as in, yeah, this is excessive. In later shots, you can actually see scars on each of his forearms that line up perfectly with a scratch across his chest plate.
Interesting.
Like something might have cut him while he stayed in this pose and refused to break out of it. Yeah, he's kind of a douche. Okay, Loki reappears.
That's kind of funny. God, I knew it was coming.
Showing its jump scares. Like, remember that? In addition to Loki screaming, if you go through this gummy time slip frame by frame, his arm does reach out and swipe inches away from Casey's face. So yeah, the ink ain't the only thing leaking on Casey's clothes here. Loki tries to follow President Mobius and President B-15 to the war room.
They probably heard the rumors.
Oh, dude, that one I loved it.
In handheld, so they must have plated in Tom Hiddleston in the background, and it looks pretty good. But what terrified Casey is just kind of a background nothing to them. They run into Hunter D90, Neil Elise, who pruned Mobius last season and threatened the victims of Haven Hills in episode 2. Actually ran into Neil in LA one time. He's a really nice guy. Loki finds the past war room and it's empty, but with a wall of 5 faces of He Who Remains, each angled in a kind of spectrum so that it looks like they're all looking in different directions.
They all have different headgear too.
The score includes some subtle vocal chanting whenever we see the face of Kang, like in the opening seconds. And the corners of this room appear to be statued heads of hunters honoring the foot soldiers who must have helped He Who Remains win his multiversal war. But in the corner of the present day war room is a female face statue, which I wonder might be for Renslayer, who sounds like ruled alongside He Who Remains in the past before he reset her and made her a judge. But we match cut from Loki and wide in the past facing this wall to the present day war room where these He Who Remains faces have been covered in this timekeeper mural. This episode just does a great job anchoring us with little visual details between the present and the past eras of the TVA to show us how it changed and suggest something about He Remains retcons and create visual expository clues to explain how time slipping alters history. We see the severed timekeeper head on the present day war room table. This was the one that Sylvie decapitated and seemed to whisper, "See you soon," as it rolled on the floor of the chamber. Sitting at this table are Judge Gamble,
dude.
Sleepy Judge, and General Dox
the hell's with that guy, dude?
Now, these two seem to have a creepy mother-son relationship that B-15 hilariously reminds us of Lady Liza Aaron with her son Robin.
What if that was a reference to that? What if that's why they did that? That would be so funny.
Aaron sitting on her lap in Game of Thrones. But the TVA even having a war room reminds us of Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, and it just kind of tells us that the TVA isn't just a legal or administrative entity, it's also a military operation with freaking generals. Remember, the TVA had to violently establish a sacred timeline by winning the multiversal war, and He Remains was a Kang variant who won that war. But they listened to this recording.
You're all variants. Everyone who works at the TVA. The timekeepers didn't create you, they kidnapped you from the timeline and erased your memories. Memories she can access through enchantment. So before this, you had a past. Maybe you had a family. a life.
Loki actually said this back in episode 4 of the first season.
You're all
Yeah.
variants.
Dox's uniform is awesome. It's covered in medals and ribbons. We actually see 8 ribbons, and they all have different faces that looks
One of them, like in the moment, I was like, one of them, I kept looking, is like, does she have Ultron medals?
somewhat like the different timekeepers, but I might be crazy. That kind of looks like a mix of Iron Man heads and Thanos heads. Or maybe these are Kang variants whose timelines she victoriously pruned, for He Who Remains. On her necktie and on her collars are pins with similar faces, but on her shoulders are floral-esque pins that likely connote her rank. Like in the US military, we use stars on the soldiers that indicate what rank of general, like a 1-star general, 2-star general, 3-star general. Based on this, Dox would be a 3-star general, of which in the real world, we only have 146 active duty generals in the United States military. On the left side of her uniform, there is a TVA hourglass badge. But similar to the UN or G8 summit meetings, when someone speaks, they hit a button for the record, which lights their corner above their heads.
We are doing this by the book and on the record.
The record now has a deeper meaning to these characters. As we know, He Who Remains keeps a transcript of everything everyone has said and will say. Back in the past era war room, Loki
good point.
plays a different recording.
You are quite a model. I will be proud to lead with you. You made a difference in this war. Thank you for being on my team.
And then Loki rewinds to play from the beginning.
For us. For all time.
Always.
Ravonna Renslayer, you are quite a model.
So much to take away.
Yeah,
He Who Remains
dude.
and Renslayer once worked side by side, and she was instrumental in winning this multiversal war in which he pruned all other Kang's timelines. But then something happened for He Who Remains to change his mind and demote Renslayer to a judge who serves the timekeepers.
good little
And he calls her
detail.
a Marvel, which can't be a coincidence. With the next MCU film being called The Marvels, it seems to elevate Renslayer to the status of a multiversal warrior, someone who could play a role alongside Carol and Monica in Secret Wars. Also, for us, and
Maybe.
always could have also been the origin of the term for all time always. When Loki rewinds the recording to hear the full thing, this is actually after he walked a full loop around this triangular table and returned to the starting point. Time is a flat circle. But let's not brush past this recording even being on this tape deck here. Someone in this past era of the TVA was listening to it in the war room, and they paused it in the middle of it right after hearing the name Ravonna Renslayer. I think Renslayer was here moments earlier in the past, and that might be what caused this past crisis with the 63 branches Mobius and B15 were referring to. Now, it's kind of hard to tell, but
catch.
the orange
Good
text on that
detail.
screen with the sound wave bar across the top reads temporal audio chronometer, and then lists the word timeline on the right column with 3 character codes for each
Oh,
one. And then at the
interesting.
bottom are the words event, date, and vector. And then the date on the screen is 6/12/23/21. Now, we don't know if that date was when the recording was made or when it was last listened to, but the TVA is supposed to be removed from time, independent of any sacred timeline date. But we do know that Kang's original scientist identity of Nathaniel Richards began in the 31st century, and the multiversal war could have been a future event in our historical timeline, like in the 22nd century, the 23rd century, after which the TVA was formed, and that could set this listen to date as 23/21. I don't know. I have so many questions, but I do know these details are added by designers like the folks at Cantina Creative. Based on interviews I've done, they're all extremely talented and creative folks who will often pitch long lists of words and phrases to put on these screens for approval by the show producers and Marvel Studios. And actually, that Thanos multiple choice question in season 1 came out of this process from the Cantina designers. So Judge Gamble, the more rational of these new leaders, points out that D90 testified seeing Renslayer's variant in the sacred timeline, referring to that scene in the season 1 finale where B15 and D90 confirmed Renslayer was once a principal at Franklin D. Roosevelt High School in Fremont, Ohio in 2018, and her name was Rebecca Termine there. That was Renslayer's comic alias when she was with Victor Timely in 1901. I just find it interesting that Judge Gamble's personal confession of her guilt for only issuing the guilty verdicts, she keeps off the record, but then she hits the on the record light when she orders to pause all pruning. Loki time slips into the present
interesting.
and
I didn't
snatches
catch that.
X5's pruning stick, and he prunes the timekeeper mural wall to reveal the He Who Remains faces. It reminds me of Hela peeling back Asgard's ceiling in Ragnarok to show the original history that Odin had covered up. It's just interesting.
It's
that
a
He Who
fun-
Remains didn't
it's a fun
erase
TV
his
trope,
original
man.
statue faces. He like wallpapered over them, kind of like some part of him knew that he might want to come back into the light someday. Loki recaps to Mobius the events of season 1 episode 5 and season 1 episode 6, and Hiddleston does such a good job conveying the terror here.
We got to the man at the end of time, and he made sense.
Dude, everybody's performances in this series has been phenomenal. Like, Tom Hiddleston's always been great as Loki, but like, I just, like, he's had some great moments to shine in the movies, but I really think that this show really showcases a lot of his range, from the comedy to the heart to these vulnerable moments to this panic. You know, I think a lot of that comes to because we're spending a lot more time with him here than in some of the films, so we get more of that, much like Paul Bettany in WandaVision, man. I just love getting to spend this time with these actors, and they're just so good. And I just think they all have great chemistry too. And that's the thing about this show that really works for me, is the way they bicker and banter and play off of one another. I talked about this in the reactions. Like, I always kind of wonder, because I haven't looked too much into this with this show particularly, is how much of this is improvised. Because I know like Owen Wilson can improv a lot, and a lot of these exchanges feels too natural at times. I was like, I just wonder how much is on the page and how much is forged by just the actual pure chemistry of these actors.
What scares Loki the most is that he met someone with a more accurate read on reality than he has. He actually repeats, "You came to kill the devil," something he remains said to them, and Loki still doesn't know if he was a devil or he wasn't. And Loki says,
I wish I'd had more time.
This is something he says a few times, actually. It's something that Marty McFly says in Back to the Future when he thinks Doc is doomed.
I only have more time. Wait a minute. I got all the time I want. I got a time machine.
While Loki begins this season seeing time slipping as a curse, I predict at the end of the season, it'll be a power that he leans into to give himself more time to do things like, undo Sylvie's decision in the Citadel, to restore He Remains, or to at least be confronted with that decision.
But how is it going to work, though, after the fact? Obviously, we see trailer shots where he still slips even after this episode. There's some things that we didn't see, but the whole point of that first episode, what they did with the loom, was supposed to cure his time slipping, right? So did he miss the gap? Somebody pruned him while the thing was green, and that was supposed to work. He came out of the time stream, out of the loom. Does that allow him to control it? Possibly? Or did it not work?
When Mobius asks who's coming, Loki points to this mural depicting several figures shooting lasers at each other. This is actually Kang's comic appearance. And it's just interesting that in this present Timekeeper TVA, they all had these Kangs in their art under their noses. We are seeing the multiversal war that He Remains has been referring to when all Kangs fought it out. And I actually think that that's going to be a future war that the MCU will depict in Avengers Kang Dynasty. Loki
part of that cycle.
Mobius, and Mobius now can't make eye contact with him.
What is it? How does it look?
I loved this.
How does it feel?
But when Loki time slips in the elevator, Mobius can't help but admit it looks horrible.
It looks like you're being born or dying or both at the same time.
Born and dying at the same time. Time is a flat circle, and so this condition is like both life events neutralizing each other out to extract one from reality. And we get this great camera gag.
It's not that bad. I can handle it. How does it look?
This is a common gag Wes Anderson loves to use, though maybe that's just with Owen Wilson being in it. But it's also something directors like the Russo brothers would do, to kind of like a third person is actually in the room gag in episodes of Arrested Development.
Michael, you don't want to make the same mistake your mom made with Buster.
What happened there?
He turned out a little soft, a little doughy.
They passed a poster that reads, "Minimize chit chat in the cafeteria, please. Limit your lunch break to 17 minutes." On the very
what the fuck?
Released ahead of the season, 17 minutes is also a time limit that the TVA.
What in the world?
17, a number that's oddly specific. It's a prime number that's just kind of difficult to keep track of or schedule your workday around. To the left of that poster is another one. The timeline won't wait for seconds, which is a solid pun with the image of someone with a stack of plates on his table. Then we see them in the same hallway where Loki escaped to in the very first episode, where we saw that variant that looks like Peggy Carter. This actually leads to the orange tile wall and the check-in desk where incoming variants would check in with Casey. But then the camera zips down the hall ahead of them as Mobius questions the name He Remains.
Pretty arrogant. It's like calling yourself last man standing.
Yeah, it might be a nod to the Tim Allen ABC sitcom that got canceled and then moved over to Fox. Hey, Tim Allen is now making bank on Disney Plus. And
I don't know how that would be a reference. I mean, that's a common phrase. I mean, it's a game type in a lot of games. It's just, it is what it is. Okay.
That's another poster. Catch a nexus, prevent a timeline, and then the timeline is only as strong
Maybe
as
I'm just being too harsh.
With quartets of pneumatic tubes, which is just so sad because at this point people would just be so close to OB, just a quick elevator trip down to him, but still they would rather just send the jobs through the tubes than talk to him. The sign inside the elevator is a ton of text, but you can make out the words.
Dude, OB's gotta be, I don't know. The fact that why is his memory intact? I know Loki's altered the timeline, but that shouldn't prevent his reset from happening, right? I don't know.
temporal radiation and some radiation symbols. Since this elevator seems to lead down only to OB, and his office is next to the temporal loom room, he's probably one who put this up, and it just sucks that he has to be so close to the radiation. Okay, there's a close-up with tube canisters with secure internal on the label. There's one with a rotting banana in it, and the label suggests it's from B10, maybe another Hunter in B15's unit who's bullying OB. We're in repairs and advancement, and there are more posters. On the left, pneumatic tube etiquette, which we get a better look of in the official posters that details approved usage, forbidden usage that includes sending
a Dear John letter,
image of a Dear John letter in the tube, and then punishable offenses, which includes live or dead animals. And then on the right is a poster of a smoking.
It said practical jokes and it uses that live or dead animal thing. I was like, is that a jab at Jared Leto? That's just immediately what I thought.
Temperamental Tempad, don't delay, repair today. And then descending from above is Ki Hui Quan as Obi or Ouroboros. His name coming from the Egyptian mythological snake eating its own tail. Time is a flat circle. Ki Hui Quan, after being a child star from Temple of Doom and the Goonies, he had a massive comeback last year, winning an Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once. His jumpsuit has a patch with 3 gear cogs, and I just love how the wide framing lines up the tubes to feed directly into his head.
Yeah.
Mobius doesn't remember the last time he saw Obi.
Could it be 3 or 4?
400 years.
What?
He was my last visitor.
Since Loki.
God, he's just so likable, man. And also with him tinkering everything and designing everything, it feeds into like his role as Data a little bit to me. That's like something I called out. I've only seen Goonies for the first time within the last year or two. I don't remember when. I reacted to it on the channel, and that was the first time I ever saw it. And like, I'm just like, his comeback, man, it's just so heartwarming. And he's seen, I don't know. I would love to see him play a villain, because I would honestly probably have to still end up rooting for him, man.
He is somewhat of a workplace comedy. Obi seems to be Stephen F. Root's Milton from Office Space, whom Lumbergh relocates
Never seen
basement,
Office
but he also
Space.
has the plucky can-do energy of Mr. Meeseeks or Abed Nadir, and I just love him. In this room, there's a jar of gumballs and a large clock with multiple hands, and another poster on the left reads, "Mind your head," warning about getting hit in the head with tube canisters when they fall. While Obi takes one of the carbon copies and pops it on the skewer, he tosses the other 2 parts of the carbon copies on the counter, clearly no ordering system. And on that stack, notice the carbon copies are not any one color, so he's just kind of taking any one of the 3 and sticking them on there. Loki time slips into the past where OB is not wearing glasses. There's no gumball machine, but there is an old school Sprite vending machine and far fewer work tickets on the stick. We get some more Wes Anderson style rapid cutting and center framing so that our eyes don't have to move across the frame to a new face on the other side of the screen during a cut. This is a little technical trick to speed up the timing of something, which is helpful for comedic effect. President OB tells Mobius that he can't remember time slipping happening, but then...
Wait. No. There was one time.
Is he talking to you in the past and you're just now remembering it?
Wow. That makes perfect sense.
So what we are seeing here
is
a memory
active
forming in real
rewriting
time inside of OB's head as Loki in the past changes his history.
See, I started to say that, and then I thought it sounded stupid, but then it's happening. Damn it.
New memories forming is something that we've seen in the butterfly effects in the movie Arrival when Amy Adams gives her past self.
Yeah, check out my reaction to Arrival.
Or in Lost season 5 when the island was unstuck from time. It's one of the craziest aspects of time travel. I love that they included it.
I've never seen Lost, and maybe I will one day.
Loki wants to end up in needs a temporal aura extractor. Now, we first heard the term a temporal aura in season 1, episode 1, when Loki was being processed, and a machine would scan Loki's temporal aura and make sure he wasn't a robot. Temporal aura must refer to a soul signature or source code that transcends all of time. President Loki says that he doesn't have a temporal aura extractor, but then we pan back to past RNA, and it's implied that Loki waited there for hours, maybe days, as past OB builds one. Loki tells past OB to hold on to it, and now it appears by present OB's side, meaning it had been there for 400 years or some amount of time, according to this history.
Yeah.
Storing objects through time is also what Doc Brown does with the DeLorean from 1985 to 1955 and Back to the Future Part 3, and something the father and son do in Frequency to share evidence of the murder suspect through the decades. OB explains that they need to take the temporal aura extractor to the temporal loom to pull Loki out of the time stream, and Mobius reports...
Wait, so I need to get to the temporal loom so the extractor can pull Loki out of the time stream?
Owen Wilson always pronounced it temporal instead of the correct temporal, which I will admit, I for many years would say temporal, like shrimp tempura, and I blame it on Owen Wilson. Wow. But Obi warns Mobius that exposure to temporal radiation will rip the skin off his body, and that Loki has to prove himself wherever he is to free himself from time. The past Obi says,
Have you heard about how if you fall into a black hole, you turn into spaghetti?
No.
Good. The less you know about that, the better.
So this may remind you of what happened to one of the Scott Lang doppelgangers in the Probability Storm and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Now that was.
Well, it's also a very common.
Have a singularity with similarly tricky quantum mechanics at play. The visual also feels like what Wanda Max.
I mean, it's just a very common theoretical thing that has I've just heard, just in, like, not in, you know, genre stuff, not from comic book stuff. That's just the thing I've always kind of heard come up when talking about entering or passing through a black hole.
Mob did to Reed Richards and Multiverse of Madness, so they head to the temporal loom observation deck, what I'm going to call the loom room. Now, the floor in the hallway has these follow me lines, a pale yellow one leading to the RNA room, and then a seafoam colored one leading to the loom room. They also pass a hot chocolate machine by the elevator. The floor outside the loom room reads, danger, temporal radiation levels increase exponentially beyond this threshold, likelihood of spaghettification increases 7,000%, proceed with caution. The loom room door has an exit, a circle
I
in the
didn't
middle,
take the time to read that.
which our writer Gina said looks similar to the Cerebral door in X-Men, and I agree. Obi says the temporal loom is where raw time is refined.
It's even forming an X.
I love this idea that time in its natural state is kind of raw and nebulous, but weaving it together into a causal history of events is an artificial construction and decision. Spaghetti is also an interesting example because this visual totally reminds me of a meat grinder making sausage.
Also, what else used spaghetti for timeline stuff here recently? The Flash.
Seeing the timeline like this from the starting end reminds me of the open-ended end piece that Miss Minute showed Sylvie and Renslayer back in season 1, episode 5. And Mobius traces skin in the dust, which is ironic because technically dust itself is primarily composed of dead human skin. Obi explains that Loki has to wait for Mobius to install the extractor in the core, and that will turn the meter green, at which point Loki can prune himself. But because it's getting unstable, he's gonna have to shut the blast doors in 5 minutes to give himself extra time to retrofit this loom to accept more branches. So really, the stakes are set by all of these people's willingness to avoid pruning all these extra timelines and erasing countless lives. They are taking the more difficult path to save other people they haven't ever met. Loki
That's a very good point.
The slipped face of Loki just flushes toward Mobius, looking faded as Hiddleston actually had to act out.
And the rod was like in his neck.
All of these spasms, having learned from the crack on the floor, Loki uses the skin tracing to know that he must be in the future now. So President Obi loads Mobius into a hilariously puffy temporal radiation suit with an insanely bulky vent running in the back. It's not just inconvenient, it's also humiliating, and has the same tan and seafoam color scheme of Obi's jumpsuit. Obi warns that once the suit gives out, before his skin peels away, Mobius will get very old, fitting for an Indiana Jones actor to reference Indiana Jones' The Last Crusade, when the false Grail caused Donovan to rapidly age. Obi covers the crack in the helmet with a duct tape like Mark Watney does in The Martian, which could seal
Check out my reaction to The Martian.
But it wouldn't keep out radiation as he trudges out on the outside of the building on words for all time always, which tells me that someone must have built this so that someone would look at this building from the outside in. Though I gotta say, while the rest of Mobius' suit padding will erode due to the temporal radiation, the duct tape is the one thing that doesn't burn away. So it is man's greatest invention. So in the future TVA, things have gotten even worse with the temporal loom crisis. A PA announcer says, TVA code 1127, all personnel report to your nearest time door evacuation point. But my question is, where do they evacuate to? Like, all of reality is about to explode. Do they go to the void? Is there some backup TVA? And Loki can see on this future TVA chronomonitor bay screen that even more branch timelines are cramming into that loom, most of them snaking off into the red zone. But it's interesting how these lines exist as dangerous branches before they even enter the loom, because earlier OB said that everything this side of the temporal loom was supposed to be abstract time. But I guess this traffic jam has caused some of that abstract time to actually turn into unwoven branches that should never be branches with nowhere to go but the red zone. And I do like how there's one.
Sorry, I got lost on all that explanation just there.
What's going on with that one? So Loki runs out over the future exterior walkway, and you can actually see the background platforms have been updated from solo Kang statues back to being 3 Timekeeper statues all propping up the platforms. I don't know if it's just me, but the whole vibe here, the sirens, the countdown, the radiation.
Dude, the attention to detail in this series, man.
And then punch a button. Doesn't this season 2 premiere kind of feel like the season 2 premiere of Lost inside the character who later becomes a similarly time-displaced character? The Lost season 2 premiere totally kicked off that season with a similar breakneck pace and some bizarre crisis with a lot of weird new rules. It kind of feels like we're in a similar place with Loki. But Loki is looking for a time stick in the vacant future TVA. He's now on the legal level, right beside where the war room was.
Did I miss actual Loki stuff? Okay, here we go.
Loki is looking for a time stick in the vacant future TVA. He's now on the legal level, right beside where the war room was, but he's drawn now to a phone ringing. We're actually reminded of Neo in the Matrix when he was sprinting.
It's a good one.
Phone ringing, and Loki
and
Neo
he gets
popped here, getting a painful plug in the torso. But the elevator doors.
Oh, it was the front. I could have swore when I watched it, I thought he got stabbed in the back. Don't ask me why I thought that, I guess. So I'm guessing Sylvie had to Sylvie had to intervene and prune him, which means at some point in time, whatever happens between Oklahoma and now, she's back on board and trying to help them.
Pried open, and it is Sylvie.
There you are.
Yes, Natalie Holt's sorrowful violin music returns. This is the music that played when Loki saw the film reel footage of Frigga dying back in season 1. And here, if you look closely, a teardrop trickles down Loki's cheek right as he is pruned from behind. So it is.
Oh wait, he just said behind.
Knowingly or unknowingly, who delivered.
Oh, it is behind him. That's why the thing. It was on the other side of him. Never mind. It isn't Sophie. So who did it?
They needed to survive right now, but to do it, they tragically had to pull him away from the face he most
Sylvie,
wanted to
God,
see. And
shit.
Speaking of teardrops, when Loki bursts out of that time stream to the present, he is reflected on Mobius's helmet in a way that makes it look like a sparkled teardrop is on Mobius's cheek. His prayers have been answered too. Two doomed souls adrift in a timeless wasteland smack into each other and propel both of them to a safe haven. Isn't that the perfect metaphor for what this series is all about? Meanwhile, a team led by General Dox
a good point.
X5, after raiding the armory as D90 warned about before, now marches through a time door, and you can look inside their duffel bags to see they contain a whole bunch of reset charges. You know those canisters? So
yeah.
they're probably headed out to
They're gonna go prune.
Said that she wanted to earlier, but they pass an orange poster that reads, "Your time cube atmosphere is enough to put you at ease. Although the gas inside the cube smells a bit noxious, be advised it is mostly non-toxic. It's to try and relax for
it is largely
next. But if
non-toxic.
Squeeze the person inside, what would be coming next?" The closing title sequence actually mixes in a lot of the imagery from the season 1 credit sequence, but they did plug in some new shots of things from the new season and some interesting curiosities. So we start with a severed timekeeper robot head, but then shortly after this, we see some post-it notes on a wall with all kinds of weird phrases. There's a few uses of the word hex, then the truth. What does the monster represent? Hex moment. Also, the boy betrayed the tower keeper. Also, his feet silent, creeping on the soft moss-covered floor.
What
Pool
the
of
hell?
Deception, vapor traps and lungs initiates dream state parallax. Mortality plus grandeur, expansiveness, and amplitude. Cracks appear in the fabric of reality. Continuity of ancestral pilgrimage. Dark mountains. That could refer to the dark mountains that was in Loki's Asgardian song in the train in the Lamentus episode last season. Arrangements having nearly the same energy. Re-echoed sound, multiple reflections of the same sound. Secret of something mountain. Yoren's betrayal. Amulet's curse. The cracking of water/ice. Her innocence, naive, keeps her safe unbeknownst to her. Then we see a slice of bright green key lime pie from the automat. Then some diagrams of the temporal loom. I think this is in the Orange TVA guidebook with the printed text of monitoring and maintaining the sacred timeline, and then handwritten in cursive looks like the words throughput modifier. Then what looks like a smaller scale version of the temporal loom, maybe a prototype of it. And then we see a bookshelf. There's a book titled Black Holes, the End of the Universe. Definitely recalling OB's wordings of spaghettification. Other titles that we can see on this bookcase include a copy of Phoenix in Obsidian by Michael Moorcock. This is a book about the representation of the eternal champion, who's a hero who appears in many forms across the multiverse, and he's flung from one existence to another. Michael Moorcock is one of the first people to fictionalize the concept of the multiverse, and yeah, this eternal champion kind of sounds like what Loki's going through. Also part of this series by Michael Moorcock, we see the final program, which is about a hip spy in the 60s named Jerry Cornelius, who's another manifestation of the eternal champion, kind of a James Bond parody, but just very surreal. You can also see Solus by Atancio, which is described as a thought-provoking and original exploration of what it means to be a sentient being. We see that turn dial phone that Loki saw and heard ringing, and here you can see a blinking light for the SS1 line on hold. So let's try to figure out what SS1 is. Then we see that hot coffee, hot chocolate, and soup machine that they passed by the elevator on the RNA level. This machine's awesome. It has options to put milk and extra marshmallows in it. And yeah, this is actually a real machine, by the way, from the 60s in Britain. Then we see a few figurines of the temporal core and someone in that suit, and I assume this is gonna be part of a future episode. There's a quick shot of that Infinity Stone drawer from season 1, and then this monkey toy. I actually spotted this in the very first season 2 teaser footage that I broke down late last year. I'm telling you,
interesting.
For the show for the past several years. This monkey is a vintage 50s toy from Japanese toy maker Alps. It's made of tin and felt. Batteries go into the stereo. It normally comes with a little green sombrero, but this one doesn't have it. He strums the guitar and he sways and rocks his head as his feet tap in those little orange shoes. We see file photos of moments from this episode, and they always put this under the casting team, Sarah Haley Finn, because these are like headshots of these people that they had cast. We see OB, we see Judge gamble. We see B-15's side-eye moment, and then we see what she's looking at, General Dox and X5's creepy embrace, and then Loki, and then we see the 1982 McDonald's register under Sophia DiMartino's name. Then we see this warning poster that's actually outside the loom room, and this is hilarious. Life-saving protocols. Check your suit for defects before entry. Exposure to extreme temporal energy will result in fatal corporeal dehusking.
Avoid spaghettification.
Then there's some orange machine that looks like it's in that orange room where Loki will put the time cube on X5 based off of trailer footage. We see He Who Remains Tempad just kind of sitting on his desk. Then we see this other book, The Zartan Contingent by someone named A.D. Doug, PhD, which we think this might be a fake book. And that's interesting because all the other books we saw are actually real books. And then
what? That name sounds familiar though.
You'll notice at the bottom reads by Ouroboros. He wrote it. Okay, we end the season 2 premiere with a post-credit scene. 1982, Broxton, Oklahoma. Holy shit. Broxton, Oklahoma is a fun pull. This is where in the comics, after the Ragnarok event, Thor chooses the town of Broxton, Oklahoma to relocate the city.
Oh, wow.
Initially hovering over the ground by a few feet. So Broxton ends up being a very important location to the Marvel Comics in that era. And I love how the title on screen specifies branch.
Interesting.
So I guess going forward, the show is going to tell us when events are set
interesting.
So Sylvie
I didn't catch that.
Killing He Remains. She enters this 1982 McDonald's. Inside, you can see this creepy vintage McDonald's land tree that locations used to have. This guy looks high as hell. They're wearing the orange uniforms that are specific to the designs worn by employees in the late 70s. Remember, this is rural Oklahoma, so they might be a bit behind the wardrobe times compared to the big cities and suburbs. Sylvie tells Jack, who's just adorable.
Not squirrel, not possum, not rats. Something that's already dead and nothing with a face. Please.
Yeah, having been on the run through apocalyptic events for eons, she's used to having to hunt her own food. And I love Jack first plugs the new Chicken McNuggets. I love this detail because as I pointed out in a video last summer, the Chicken McNuggets were first introduced in 1981. Just great continuity there. And Jack just goes on with the menu items. And Sylvie says,
I want to try everything.
Yeah, freaking try guys keep here. Sylvie really wants to just try everything in life. But McDonald's represents simple childhood joys that she never had growing up. And just trying everything on the McDonald's menu is really her first step to try to reclaim those simple pleasures that she was denied. So what can we expect from episode 2? Well, we're gonna talk about that on Sunday because we're launching a new format called Sneak Peek. And for this season of Loki, Jessica Clemens is coming back. She and I are gonna team up for these weekly heat checks for Loki, looking ahead to each next episode. You can support our channel by grabbing some merch available at nerdriot.shop. Subscribe to all 3 channels. Grab
their stuff, subscribe to their channels, guys. Great breakdown, man. Obsessive detail. Dude, this show, I don't know, man. The attention to detail in the sets, the production design, everything is just above board, man. It's just so good. It's just so good. I don't know how to read into a lot of it in as far as to where it's going to go with certain elements from what we have seen. And my memory is also not that great, but I think there's some great little things we can take away from this. There's also some things that's definitely helped clear up for me as well, which is nice because I could go into the next episode a little, I guess, better prepared. But yeah, man, great breakdown, dude. But guys, what did you think? Was there anything you guys caught that maybe they missed here? Your interpretations that may be different? I'd love to hear from you guys. So sound off the comments. Let me know your thoughts down below. We'll carry on the conversation after the video. Hope you enjoyed this reaction. If it did, leave a like, drop a comment, subscribe if you're not already. Make sure to subscribe to Rockstars as well. They are a great channel for these breakdowns. And before we go, I want to shout out our channel legends. Manny Share, Ryan Karen, York Coruscant, Margaret Grace, Melito, Robert Aguiano, Jeffrey Hale, Jake Contrell, Eric Official, Amy Becca, and Casey Wood. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. That's it for this video, guys. I'll see you all next week on the next episode of Loki. Take care, everybody.